Right now, without planting a single seed, without buying anything, without even trying, you already have food growing around you. Not just any food, nutrient-dense, resilient, self-replacing food that comes back every year, no matter what you do to stop it. It's in the cracks of your driveway, along the edges of your garden beds, hiding in your lawn, pushing through places where nothing else survives. And you've been at war with it. You've pulled it out by the roots, you've sprayed it with chemicals, you've covered it in mulch, hoping to suffocate it. You've spent time, money, and effort trying to erase it from your space. And every single time, it comes back. That should tell you something. Because in nature, anything that refuses to die, anything that adapts, spreads, survives drought, cold, poor soil, and neglect, that's not a problem. That's a solution. But somewhere along the way, you were taught to see it differently. You were told that a clean, uniform lawn is the goal, that anything growing outside your plan is a weed, that if you didn't plant it, it doesn't belong. So you've been removing the most resilient plants on your property and replacing them with the most fragile ones. Plants that need perfect soil, regular watering, protection, fertilizer, constant attention. And even then, they struggle. Meanwhile, the plants you're destroying require nothing. No irrigation system, no seed packets, no maintenance schedule. They grow anyway. There's a reason for that. Before modern agriculture, before chemical fertilizers, before global food supply chains, people didn't have the luxury of ignoring plants like these. They relied on them. They understood them. They knew which ones provided vitamins, which ones offered protein, which ones could be harvested early in the season when nothing else was available. They didn't call them weeds. They called them food. Some of these plants were so valuable that people carried them across continents. They planted them intentionally. They protected them. Now, those same plants are being sprayed with herbicides, not because they're harmful, but because they grow too well, and that's the shift you need to see. Because once you understand what's actually growing around you, you stop looking at your yard the same way. You stop seeing a maintenance problem, and you start seeing a system that's already working without you. In this video, you're going to see 6 of the most common plants growing in ordinary spaces. Plants you've probably stepped on, cut down, or ripped out without a second thought. And you're going to understand what they actually offer, not in theory, but in real, measurable value. Nutrition, function, resilience. By the end, you won't just recognize them. You'll start questioning why you ever tried to get rid of them in the first place. Let's start with the one you already know. You've seen it thousands of times. Bright yellow flower, jagged leaves, that white puffball that spreads everywhere the moment you touch it. Dandelion. If you've ever had a lawn, you've probably tried to kill it. And if you've ever succeeded, it didn't last. Because dandelion doesn't just grow, it persists. Its root system goes deep. Much deeper than most garden plants. It pulls nutrients from layers of soil your vegetables can't even reach. That's part of why it's so nutritious. A small handful of dandelion greens contains more vitamin K than your body needs in an entire day. Not slightly more, several times more. It carries beta-carotene levels that compete with vegetables people deliberately plant and protect. It delivers calcium in a form your body can actually use. And all of that comes from a plant that grows through cracks in concrete. But what makes it even more valuable is that every part of it is usable. The leaves can be eaten fresh or cooked, slightly bitter, but that bitterness signals something important. Those compounds support digestion. They stimulate appetite. They're functional, not just nutritional. The flowers can be used in teas or even fermented into simple homemade drinks. And the root, the part most people never even think about, has been used for centuries. When roasted and ground, it becomes a coffee substitute. Not identical, but close enough to serve the same ritual. Warm, earthy, slightly bitter. In some places that root is sold, packaged, branded, marketed as a wellness product. Meanwhile, you've been pulling it out of your yard for free. Think about that for a second. You are actively removing something that others are buying and replacing it with plants that demand constant input just to survive. But the real advantage of dandelion isn't just what it gives you, it's when it gives it. It appears early in the season, before most garden crops are ready, before your carefully planted seeds even begin to sprout. It fills a gap most people don't even think about. That period when winter food stores are low and nothing new has grown yet. Dandelion doesn't wait for ideal conditions. It starts anyway, and it doesn't stop easily. You can cut it down, and it comes back. You can pull it, and if even part of the root remains, it returns. It's not fragile, it's persistent by design. And once you recognize that, you start to see it differently. Not as something invading your space, but as something offering you value, whether you accept it or not. And this is just the beginning, because the next plant on this list doesn't just provide vitamins. It provides something most plant-based foods struggle to deliver at all. The next plant is something most people walk right past. It doesn't stand out. No bright flowers, no dramatic height. It stays low to the ground, quietly spreading between the plants you actually meant to grow. But what it does is extraordinary. It produces omega-3 fatty acids. This plant is called purslane. At first it doesn't look like much. Slightly reddish stems, small rounded leaves, almost like a tiny succulent. Most people see it and pull it out without thinking twice. But nutritionally, it's one of the most powerful plants you'll find growing wild. Omega-3s are usually linked to fish or expensive supplements, something you buy, not something that grows under your feet. Yet purslane provides them naturally, straight from the soil, and in surprisingly high amounts, more than any common leafy green. Even more interesting, it thrives where other plants struggle. Heat doesn't kill it. Dry soil doesn't slow it down. Neglect doesn't stop it. In fact, the harsher the conditions, the better it often grows. While your carefully planted crops begin to fail in peak summer, purslane keeps expanding, producing food without interruption. It's built for survival. Its efficient way of photosynthesis allows it to conserve water and keep growing when most plants shut down. And here's the part most people overlook. You don't need to plant it. You don't need to maintain it. You don't even need to water it. It shows up on its own again and again. All it asks is one thing: don't pull it out. As for taste, it's surprisingly good, slightly tangy, crisp and refreshing. You can eat it raw in salads, toss it into cooked dishes, or use it like any leafy green. This isn't just survival food, it's real food. So the question becomes, if something grows effortlessly, keeps coming back, and provides nutrients people pay for, why are you removing it? Because the next plant offers something even more valuable. Not just nutrients, protein. This next plant is often mistaken for something familiar. At a glance, it looks like spinach, soft green leaves, simple structure, nothing unusual. But unlike spinach, you didn't plant it. This is lamb's quarters. Once you learn to recognize it, you'll start noticing it everywhere, especially in places where the soil has been disturbed. Garden beds, pathways, edges of cultivated land, exactly where you're already working. While you're carefully growing crops that need spacing, watering, and protection, lamb's quarters shows up uninvited and often performs better. Nutritionally, it rivals spinach, and in some ways, surpasses it. It contains more protein per serving, along with high levels of iron, calcium, and essential vitamins. It cooks the same way, tastes similar, requires no special preparation. You can use it immediately. But what really sets this plant apart is what it produces beyond its leaves: seeds. Small, dark seeds that closely resemble quinoa. And that's not a coincidence. They belong to the same family, which means this plant offers two food sources: fresh greens and a storable grain alternative. Think about that. A plant you never planted is giving you both immediate nutrition and something you can harvest and store long-term. No effort, no cost, no planning. Historically, this plant wasn't ignored. Indigenous communities understood its value. They didn't remove it. They worked with it. It was part of a natural food system. Today, it's treated like a weed, something to eliminate before it competes with real crops. But that competition only exists because we've decided what matters and what doesn't. Lamb's quarters grows fast, adapts easily and produces abundantly. And like the others, it's already there, not waiting for you to plant it, just waiting for you to stop removing it. By now, you're starting to see a pattern. These plants don't just survive. They fill gaps, nutritional gaps, seasonal gaps, environmental gaps where your cultivated crops struggle or fail. And the next one might be the most overlooked of all, because most people don't even realize it's different from something they already know. You've seen it. Small clusters of 3 heart-shaped leaves, delicate flowers, usually yellow or white. It grows quietly in shaded corners, along fence lines, under trees. Most people walk past it without a second thought. Or they mistake it for clover. But it's not clover. This is wood sorrel, and the moment you taste it, you understand why it matters. It has a sharp, citrus-like flavor, slightly sour, refreshing, almost like a natural lemon note built into a leaf. That taste comes from oxalic acid, and that flavor is more than just interesting. It's a signal, because wood sorrel is a natural source of vitamin C, not in small amounts, in meaningful, functional amounts, and that matters more than most people realize. Because one of the earliest nutritional deficiencies in any limited food system isn't calories, it's micronutrients, especially vitamin C. History is full of examples where people had enough to eat, but still got sick. Long sea voyages, harsh winters, periods where diets relied heavily on stored grains and preserved foods. The problem wasn't quantity, it was freshness. It was the absence of living plant material. That's where wood sorrel fits in. It grows in places your garden usually ignores. Partial shade, low-light areas, edges where sunlight doesn't fully reach. In other words, spaces that go unused. While you focus on optimizing your main beds, wood sorrel quietly occupies the margins and produces something essential. You don't have to create space for it. It finds space on its own, and it gives you something your main crops often can't, especially in less than ideal conditions. Fresh, vitamin-rich greens, right where you didn't expect them. And once you recognize it, once you taste it, once you understand what it offers, you stop overlooking those shaded corners, because they're not empty anymore, they're productive, and what comes next doesn't just feed you, it changes the soil itself. This one is everywhere. If you've ever seen a lawn that hasn't been heavily treated with chemicals, you've seen it. 3 small leaflets, low to the ground, soft green spreading across open areas, and when it blooms, small white or red flower heads rise just above the leaves. This is clover. And for a long time it wasn't considered a weed at all. It was planted on purpose, because clover doesn't just grow in soil, tea improves it. Its roots form a partnership with bacteria. Together they pull nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form the soil can use. That nitrogen becomes available to other plants. It feeds the system. Before synthetic fertilizers existed, this was one of the main ways farmers restored their land. They planted clover, they let it grow, they allowed it to do its work naturally, and it worked. Fields that had been depleted became fertile again, not through chemicals, but through biology. Now think about what you do when clover appears in your lawn. You mow it down, you spray it, you remove it. You eliminate one of the few plants that actively improves the ground beneath your feet. And then, in many cases, you buy fertilizer to replace what you just destroyed. That's the cycle. Remove the natural system, pay to replicate it artificially. Clover breaks that pattern. It creates fertility without effort. It spreads across large areas, not just small garden beds. It works continuously, season after season, and it offers more than just soil improvement. Those flowers can be harvested, dried, used in teas or other preparations that people actively purchase in stores. Again, something growing freely in your space, being sold elsewhere. But the deeper value isn't just in what you can take from clover, it's in what it gives back. Because a healthy system isn't just about output, it's about regeneration. And clover does that automatically. It feeds the soil so that everything else around it can grow better, including the crops you choose to plant. Which means it's not competing with your garden, it's supporting it. And once you understand that, the idea of removing it starts to feel backwards. Because the final plant on this list brings everything together. Not just nutrients, not just resilience, but timing. The one factor that determines whether a system actually sustains you when you need it most. There's a moment every year that most people don't think about until they feel it. Late winter, early spring, your stored food is running low, your garden isn't ready yet, seeds are still in packets, soil is still cold, nothing you planted is producing. It's a gap, and in any self-reliant system that gap is the most dangerous point. Because it's not about abundance, it's about timing. This is where the final plant steps in. Chickweed. It doesn't wait for perfect weather. It doesn't wait for your planting schedule. It doesn't care about frost dates or ideal soil temperatures. It starts growing before everything else. Small, delicate-looking stems spread across the ground, forming dense green mats. Tiny white flowers appear, almost like stars. It looks fragile, but it's not. It's early, and that changes everything. Because while your garden is still empty, chickweed is already producing food. Fresh, living greens. At a time when your options are usually limited to whatever you managed to store months ago. That alone makes it valuable. But it doesn't stop there. It grows fast, extremely fast. One plant can produce hundreds of seeds. Those seeds remain viable in the soil for years. Once it appears, it doesn't disappear. It becomes part of your system, returning every year right when you need it most. And unlike many wild plants, it's easy to use. The taste is mild, slightly grassy, soft texture, similar to young spinach. You don't have to force yourself to eat it. You can actually enjoy it. Nutritionally, it provides vitamin C, along with minerals like calcium and magnesium. Exactly the kind of support your body needs after a long winter. But its real power isn't just in what it contains, it's in when it shows up. Because food that arrives at the right time is more valuable than food that arrives in abundance later. Chickweed doesn't compete with your garden. It bridges the gap before your garden even begins. And once you understand that, you start seeing early growth differently. Not as something to clear out before planting, but as something that's already doing its job. Keeping your system continuous, unbroken. Now, step back for a moment. Look at everything you've just seen, not as individual plants, but as a system. Because that's what this really is. Dandelion gives you early greens, deep-mined nutrients, and roots you can use. Purslane provides omega-3s during the hottest, harshest part of the year when other crops struggle. Lamb's quarters offers both leafy greens and seeds, covering fresh food and potential storage. Wood sorrel fills shaded gaps with vitamin C-rich leaves where nothing else thrives. Clover improves your soil continuously, feeding everything around it without effort. Chickweed arrives before your garden even begins, closing the seasonal gap when food is most limited. Each one solves a different problem. Each one appears without being planted. Each one persists without needing maintenance. And together, they create something most people are trying and failing to build from scratch, a resilient food system. But here's the part that's hardest to accept. You already have it, not in theory, not as an idea. Physically present, growing around you right now. And instead of working with it, most people are spending money to destroy it. Think about the resources involved. Time spent pulling weeds, money spent on herbicides, effort spent maintaining a uniform lawn that produces nothing, and then more money spent at the store to replace what that land could have been providing for free. It's not just inefficient, It's backwards. Because the system you're protecting, the one that depends on inputs, supply chains, and constant intervention, is the fragile one. The system you're removing, the one that grows on its own, adapts to conditions and returns every year, is the stable one. These plants have survived everything: droughts, floods, changes in climate, shifts in agriculture. They don't need perfect conditions, they adjust. And that adaptability is what makes them valuable, not just as individual foods, but as a foundation, something you can build on, not replace. So the question isn't whether these plants are useful. You've already seen that they are. The real question is what you do with that information, because this isn't about turning your entire yard into a wild space overnight. It's about changing how you see what's already there. Right now, most people divide their space into two categories: things they want and things they don't. Plants they chose and plants they remove. But that line is arbitrary. It's based on habit, not function. Because when you look at these so-called weeds through a functional lens, something shifts. You stop asking, "Did I plant this?" And you start asking, "What does this do? Does it feed you? Does it improve your soil? Does it grow when other things don't? Does it return without effort?" If the answer is yes, then it has value. And once you start thinking that way, your approach changes. You don't have to give up your garden. You don't have to stop growing the crops you like. But you stop working against the plants that are already working for you. You allow some of them to stay. You observe where they grow best. You notice the patterns, the shaded areas where wood sorrel thrives, the compacted soil where dandelion breaks through, the hot, dry patches where purslane takes over, the early season growth of chickweed before anything else appears, the way clover spreads and improves the ground beneath it. This isn't randomness. It's feedback. Your land is telling you what works without you having to experiment. And when you listen to that, you start designing differently. Instead of forcing conditions to match your plans, you let your plans adapt to the conditions. You build around what's already succeeding. That reduces effort, it reduces cost, and it increases resilience, because you're no longer relying entirely on plants that need perfect conditions. You're integrating plants that thrive in imperfect ones, and that balance matters, especially when conditions change, because they always do. In the end, this isn't really about weeds. It's about perspective. For years, you've been taught that control is the goal, that a perfect uniform space is something to aim for, that anything growing outside that vision is a problem to be solved. But nature doesn't work that way. It doesn't aim for perfection. It aims for survival, diversity, adaptation, resilience. And the plants you've been removing are examples of that. They don't need permission to grow. They don't need ideal conditions. They don't wait for you to prepare the soil or provide the right inputs. They show up, they adapt, they persist, and they offer value, whether you recognize it or not. So the shift is simple, but it's not always easy. You stop seeing these plants as intruders, and you start seeing them as contributors. You stop asking how to eliminate them, and you start asking how to use them, because once you make that shift, your space changes. Not visually, at least not at first, but functionally. It becomes more productive, more resilient, more aligned with how natural systems actually work. You still grow your crops. Oh, you still plant what you want. But you're no longer doing it alone. You're working with a system that was already there, one that's been trying to establish itself for years, and the moment you stop fighting it, it starts working for you, and you may never look at your lawn the same way again.